Last week, folks in Clark County, Kentucky were woken up in the middle of the night by what sounded like a huge explosion. Giant middle-of-the-night explosion just east of Lexington, Kentucky. Turned out to be a gas pipeline rupture. Local news stations were flooded with calls about it, so they sent the crews out, as you can see, to cover the incident overnight. According to those local news reports, there had been another explosion in this same area along the same set of gas lines about 4 years ago. After last week's gas line scare in central Kentucky, we have word this week from the Associated Press that Kentucky's junior senator is taking a principled stand now on gas pipeline safety. His principled stand is that he's against it. He is blocking gas pipeline safety measures. The safety bill, the AP notes, has support from both parties and from the gas industry, which, after all, has been having a problem with its pipelines blowing up. Quoting the AP, a deadly gas pipeline explosion near San Francisco last year, along with other recent gas explosions and oil pipeline spills, has created consensus in Congress, as well as in the industry, that there are gaps in federal safety regulations. There is a consensus that something needs to be done. A consensus except for Senator Rand Paul, who is blocking it from being done. Quote, officials familiar with Senator Paul's objections said he has told lobbyists and company officials that he's not opposed to any specific part of the bill, just to the notion of additional federal regulation. The notion. Gas pipeline safety equals government regulation, which, according to Rand Paul, is bad in the abstract, even if it makes sense in the specific. A gas pipeline explosion in San Bruno, California in September of last year spit out a 300-foot-tall flame that burned for an hour and a half until workers were able to shut off gas valves feeding the pipeline manually. That explosion killed 8 people and destroyed dozens of homes. In December, a gas line apparently exploded in Wayne, Michigan. It destroyed a furniture store and killed 2 people. In January of this year, a gas pipeline exploded in Philadelphia and killed a city utility worker and injured 6 other people, including 2 firefighters. About a week later, several buildings were destroyed in Fairport Harbor, Ohio, in a gas line explosion and series of fires. A gas line explosion in February in Allentown, Pennsylvania, leveled 2 row houses and killed 5 people, including a 4-month-old child. The pipeline safety bill that is being supported right now by Democrats and Republicans and the gas industry itself could mean things like automatic shutoff valves on new pipelines and confirmation that records about how much pressure pipelines can take are, in fact, accurate records. It could mean more inspections of old pipelines for safety. But even after the last year we've had with fatal giant gas pipeline explosions in this country, even after last week in which Rand Paul's own constituents lived through a catastrophic gas pipeline rupture, Senator Rand Paul is the one solitary U.S. senator who is willing to stand up and block gas pipeline safety for the whole country. He says it's on principle. President Obama is now squaring off against Republicans like he has never done before in his presidency, drawing out the contrast between himself and Republicans, between, he says, the whole country and Republicans, on issues like that principle.
We should have no more regulation than the health, safety, and security of the American people require. Every rule should meet that common sense test. But what we can't do, what I will not do, is let this economic crisis be used as an excuse to wipe out the basic protections that Americans have counted on for decades. In fact, this larger notion that the only thing we can do to restore prosperity is just dismantle government, refund everybody's money, and let everyone write their own rules and tell everyone they're on their own, that's not who we are. It's not the story of America. No single individual built America on their own. We built it together. We have been and always will be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, a nation with responsibilities to ourselves and with responsibilities to one another. And members of Congress, it is time for us to meet our responsibilities.
To put it more succinctly and without the applause lines, government equals bad, not an answer to America's problems. And when one of America's problems is exploding gas pipelines, a certain junior senator from Kentucky may have picked a fight against fixing those pipelines on principle. But the people on the other side of that fight are fighting on principle, too, and doing it out loud. The president's campaign for his jobs bill is happening alongside the beginnings of his campaign for re-election. And to make both cases, for his re-election and for his jobs bill, the president is talking more and more now about principles, about values. More than ever, he seems very happy to contrast his values and what he argues are American values with the values that the Republican Party is showing right now.
Middle-class families shouldn't pay higher tax rates than millionaires and billionaires. Warren Buffett's secretary shouldn't pay a higher tax rate than Warren Buffett. A teacher or a nurse or a construction worker making $50,000 a year shouldn't pay higher tax rates than somebody making $50 million. That's just common sense. And keep in mind, I'm not saying this because we should be punishing success. This is the land of opportunity. But what's also a quintessentially American idea is that those of us who've done well should pay our fair share to contribute to the upkeep of the nation that made our success possible. I've talked to them. Most wealthy Americans agree with this. Of course, the Republicans in Congress, they call this class warfare. You know what? If asking a millionaire to pay the same tax rate as a plumber makes me a class warrior, a warrior for the working class, I will accept that. I will wear that charge as a badge of honor.
You want to know why the president says he is willing to wear that charge, the charge of being a class warrior, as a badge of honor? A warrior for the working class, a warrior for the middle class? It's because in this country, what he is describing, what he is doing, what he is fighting for in these speeches is a very, very popular thing. A poll out this week from Public Policy Polling shows 73% of Americans agree with the president on the Warren Buffett rule that the president just laid out, changing the tax code so people who make more than $1 million a year pay at least the same tax rates as people who make less than that. You should not have your taxes lower than everybody else because you're a zillionaire. Look at that. 73% of Americans support that. 73% of Americans don't support the idea of puppies. 73%? That is a really, really, really popular idea. That, I dare say, is a mainstream idea. Even conservatives like this. When you pull out just Republicans from the polling here, you still have 66% support for the Buffett rule. 66% of Republicans are with the president on this one. Social conservatives are always talking about wanting to make elections values elections. And what they mean is that they want the election to be about gay rights and abortion and stuff like that. Turns out it is Democrats this year who want this to be a values election, except the values they want to talk about are things like rich people shouldn't get special treatment and bridges shouldn't be left to rot and fall down. Also, gas pipeline explosions, bad. It's not as catchy as guns, gods, and gays, but it is something. Joining us now is Joe Sonka, founder and owner of the blog Barefoot and Progressive and a staff writer at Leo, which is the alt-weekly paper based in Louisville, Kentucky. Mr. Sonka, thanks very much for being here. It's nice to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel.
Is it resonating in Kentucky after last week's the pipeline rupture and everything? Is it resonating in Kentucky that Rand Paul is holding up the pipeline safety bill here?
Well, the AP broke the news on Tuesday, and people are just now starting to realize what Rand Paul is doing. But that's basically what his Tea Party base wants. The Tea Party has a really strong base in Kentucky, and they elected Rand Paul to come in and dismantle government and shrink it as much as possible. And that's exactly what he's doing this week, even on this pipeline safety bill, which even the industry itself has no problem with and thinks it's reasonable.
So you don't Rand Paul absolutely campaigned as an anti-government candidate. I had a very long, awkward interview with him in which he was so anti-government he wouldn't say that he thought that government intervening in terms of civil rights laws even was necessarily a good thing. But right. Do you think that Kentuckians knew that this is the kind of thing that he meant by this, that pipeline safety would be one of the things that he'd be opposed to? Do you think that isn't a surprise?
I don't think it's much of a surprise. If you consider during his Senate campaign, he was saying that there should be less safety regulation from the federal government when it comes to mining. And he said that, well, if there's a mining accident and a bunch of miners die, well, people can just take their labor and their rational self-interest over to another mine and work there. And I guess they would also hope that the lack of regulations also didn't kill them at that mine, too. So I think Rand Paul pretty much laid it out straight in the Senate campaign that he was going to come into Washington and get rid of as many regulations as he can and shrink government. And apparently 55% of voters in Kentucky went along with that.
In terms of how Rand Paul's Senate campaign is going to evolve over time, if at all, I wonder what you think about your vantage point being closer up to him and dealing with his constituents all the time. What do you think he's going to do about pressure from his own party? Congressman Charlie Dent, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania, said that he was saddened but not surprised by Senator Paul putting this hold on the pipeline safety thing. Do you think that pressure from other Republicans will make any difference to him, either in the short run or over time?
Well, it's really fascinating, his relationship with Mitch McConnell. Rand Paul ran basically against establishment Republicans like Mitch McConnell, blaming them for increasing the national debt and the bank bailout. But what you've seen over the past year is that Mitch McConnell doesn't really call out Rand Paul, and Rand Paul doesn't really call out Mitch McConnell. So I don't think you're going to find it from Mitch McConnell because they seem to have a mutually beneficial relationship. But you could see other Republicans pointing to Rand Paul and saying, hey, that's Rand Paul and the Tea Party. That's not necessarily me. But in terms of the Tea Party base here in Kentucky, that's what Rand Paul really cares about. And it's not just the base. He's a true believer. He comes from, his intellectual heroes are libertarians like Lew Rockwell and Ayn Rand and people from the von Mises Institute and obviously his father. So he's definitely a true believer when it comes to that. And he's typically very stubborn. So I'm not sure how much good pressure from other Republicans is going to do.
And in the meantime, the whole country doesn't get improved gas pipelines. Yeah. Joe Sonka, founder and owner of the Barefoot and Progressive blog and staff writer at the Louisville Alt Weekly, Leo. Thanks very much for joining us. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me on, Rachel.
On last night's show, we ran out of time because of the breaking non-Chris Christie news before we could show you our best new thing in the world. While I like the happy stories and the weird stories, the ones I really, really love are the stories that are happy and weird and also a little weepy. So I'm pleased to report that we've got a deluxe three-hanky heart tugger coming up. Best new thing in the world right at the end of the show tonight.